Hi guys. Tonight we wander deep into the ancient forests, where shadows speak a language older than time, and the quiet hum of insects feels like the heartbeat of the world. You can almost smell the pine resin as it seeps through the bark, the damp moss soft beneath your feet, and somewhere nearby a whisper of water curling through the stones. The night is still young, but you are about to step into a story thousands of years old. You probably wouldn't survive this first week out here. Don't worry, most of us wouldn't. Without Wi-Fi, snacks, or that one coffee mug you pretend isn't emotional support, the wilderness has ways of humbling even the most confident explorer. Yet for the first peoples of the Americas, this was home, school, and grocery store all in one. They didn't just live in nature, they listened to it, negotiated with it, sometimes even argued with it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Post your location and your local time down in the comments. Now, dim the lights. You begin among forests so vast they seem to go on forever, stretching across continents like emerald seas. The air hums with life birds, crickets, wind sighing through cedar needles, and every sound has meaning. Here, the ancestors of today's Native American nations walked softly, each tribe adapting to the terrain that shaped them. In the Pacific Northwest, towering redwoods stood like cathedral pillars. In the Great Plains, grass brushed the knees of bison and men alike. Farther south, deserts burned gold under endless skies, yet even there, life found clever ways to endure. You move quietly, learning as you go. Every plant, every trick in the mud becomes a kind of vocabulary. To survive, you must first become fluent in the landscape. The people who thrived here long before maps and fences did so not by conquering nature, but by cooperating with it. You learn to read the wind. It carries the scent of deer or the warning of rain. You feel the ground, noting where it's cool from underground streams, or warm from sun-baked stone clues about what lies nearby. A mainstream historical fact hums beneath your feet. The first inhabitants of the Americas likely crossed from Siberia over the Bering Land Bridge around 15,000 years ago, following herds of mammoth and caribou. It wasn't a grand expedition, it was survival, step by cold step, through an unforgiving ice age. Yet even then, people brought memory, ritual, and knowledge of plants that could feed or heal. They adapted so well that within millennia, their descendants flourished from the Arctic to the Amazon. You pause beside a riverbank, noticing tracks, deer, rabbit, maybe something larger. The hunt is both art and gamble. Hunger sharpens every sense. You feel the steady breath of patience pass from generation to generation. Wait for the wind to shift. Step where the leaves are soft. Listen before you move. Somewhere in this same forest, you stumble upon a quirky detail. Early hunters sometimes rubbed their bodies with crushed herbs or even mud to mask their scent. There are stories of some tribes using smoke from burning sage or sweetgrass before a hunt, not only as camouflage but as purification, to align themselves with the spirit world. The ritual wasn't superstition, it was focus. Imagine doing that before a job interview, it might actually work. The night deepens. A faint drizzle beads on your skin. You picture hunters moving silently through the trees, spears poised, eyes reflecting flickers of lightning in the distance. They are both fragile and powerful fragile, because one misstep could mean starvation, powerful because they've mastered the rhythm of the wild. Historians still debate whether these early societies depended primarily on large game hunting or smaller, seasonal foraging. Some argue that the big hunts, the mammoth chases, were rare heroic moments retold in story but not daily life. Others suggest the opposite, that communal hunts shaped social bonds and leadership. The truth, as it often does, probably lies somewhere in between, hidden like a bone beneath centuries of soil. You rest under a spruce, watching mist creep between trunks. Every sense slows. The forest seems to breathe around you. In this moment, you start to understand what survival really meant. Not adrenaline, not brute strength, but observation. A berry bush stripped too clean means another animal passed this way. A bird's sudden silence hints at a predator's shadow. Even the pattern of moss on a fallen tree whispers the direction of the Sunday. There's a calm satisfaction in that realization. These people didn't merely endure their surroundings, they belonged. Their tools were simple, but their awareness was extraordinary. You can almost feel it spreading into you, that ancient attentiveness, the subtle shift from spectator to participant. The rain becomes a lullaby. You think of the generations that slept beneath these same stars, passing stories in low voices, stories not just about survival, but about gratitude. They thanked the river for fish, the deer for its hide, the fire for its warmth. The modern world may call it myth, they called it manners. Somewhere far off, thunder rolls a slow drumbeat of the earth, reminding you that time doesn't stop here. Tomorrow the hunters will rise again, their silhouettes ghosting through fog, following tracks that will soon be washed clean by the storm. And you, in your dry, comfortable bed, can almost feel the damp chill of their world, smell the pine and smoke, sense the quiet pride of people who could read the world without ever needing a compass. It's strange, isn't it, how the more they depended on nature, the freer they were. The forest provided everything if you knew how to ask nicely. The lesson lingers as you close your eyes. Survival isn't a test of dominance, it's a conversation. And tonight, you're just beginning to learn the language. You follow the faint path of footprints pressed deep into ancient mud, softened by centuries of wind and rain. Each step carries you farther back in time, to an age when the Americas were still fresh with ice, mist, and movement. The ground beneath your feet hums with history, and you begin to understand that every footprint you see is more than a mark of passage. It is a signature of courage, carved into the earth by people chasing both food and tomorrow. You can almost feel the cold of that long journey. Imagine crossing an endless bridge of frozen tundra, where sea and land blend into one wide sheet of white. The first humans to enter this world did not know where it led. They followed the herds because hunger allowed no hesitation. Mammoths, caribou, and giant bison drifted south in search of grass, and the people followed. The air burned their lungs. The wind tore at their furs. Still, they walked. Over thousands of years, those migrations became the heartbeat of a continent. Tribes divided, adapted and evolved, shaping languages, tools, and traditions that matched the terrain around them. In the high Rockies, they became mountain people. In the swamps of the southeast, they became river people. And on the open plains, they became hunters of speed and sky. Survival, for them, was not about conquering new ground, but listening to where the land invited them to rest. A known historical fact whispers through this frozen air. Archaeologists have found ancient spear points, known as Clovis points, scattered across North America. These were finely shaped tools, precise and deadly, evidence of a culture that knew how to survive when the world itself was trying to freeze them out. The Clovis people appeared more than 13,000 years ago, and for a long time, scholars believed they were the first. But the truth is murkier. Beneath that certainty lies a strange debate that still keeps archaeologists awake at night. Some claim there were people here long before the Clovis culture, traveling by sea or through coastal routes, now lost beneath rising oceans. Others argue that the Clovis hunters were the true pioneers, pushing through the ice corridors like ghosts of persistence. The arguments stretch across conferences and coffee tables, but the answer, like the wind, refuses to settle. You imagine those early travelers camping along the edge of glaciers, building fires from driftwood and bone, their children huddled close, learning which stars guided the herds. They probably did not think of themselves as explorers or founders. They were simply families, trying to fill their bellies and keep their hearts beating through another night. And then there is one of those charmingly odd details that always makes you pause. Some evidence suggests that early hunters, when tracking animals across icy plains, sometimes mimicked the sounds of the herds to blend in. Imagine standing in a line of humans dressed in fur, lowing softly like bison to avoid being noticed. You can almost hear the absurd courage of it. They didn't just chase their prey. They learned to think like it, move like it, even dream like it. Your path now bends along a dry riverbed, its stones polished smooth by the ghosts of ancient floods. This river once carried life, fish flashing beneath the surface and reeds whispering in the breeze. People followed the water because it was both highway and promise. It guided them through the seasons, from hunting grounds to gathering fields. Even today, many tribal oral histories describe migration as a circle rather than a line, returning again and again to familiar places with new lessons each year. The rhythm of their lives followed the rhythm of nature. The herds moved, so they moved. The berries ripened, so they gathered. It was a dance of patience, and the land led every step. By now you are moving through the plains. The trees have thinned, and the horizon stretches forever. You feel exposed under so much sky, but also strangely alive. Here the people learn to use the wind as their ally. The tall grass hid both hunter and hunted. The sun burned their faces by day, and the cold bit their fingers by night. Yet they thrived. When you look closer, you realize something profound. The wilderness did not shape them into one culture. It shaped them into hundreds. Each group, from the Arctic tundra to the tropical rainforest, developed unique ways to live, eat, and move. And still, at the core of it all, there was one unspoken rule. Take what you need, thank what you take. You crouch, tracing a print in the dirt. The edges are sharp, the impression deep. It might be from a deer, or a man, or maybe both, depending on how long the earth has remembered. The ground holds everything. If you listen carefully, it even tells stories. You might imagine the first storytellers sitting around their fires, spinning tales of migration and survival. The children probably laughed at the idea of walking across a frozen sea, while the elders nodded, knowing memory is the truest form of map. Every story was a compass, pointing the next generation toward food, safety, and respect. As you settle by your imaginary fire, you think about the sheer audacity of it all. To step into a continent without knowing what lay beyond the next ridge, to trust your instincts and your ancestors' whispers. You can almost feel the crunch of snow under your boots, the sting of wind against your cheeks. In the distance, the silhouettes of mammoths fade into mist, and the people move on. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining what it must have felt like to be both lost and entirely at home in such vastness. You realize survival here was never about building walls or fences. It was about movement, awareness, and humility. The wilderness rewarded those who understood balance and punished those who tried to control it. As the stars appear overhead, you sense that same quiet wonder that must have filled those first travelers. They didn't know where they were going, but they went anyway. And because they did, every forest, desert, and mountain you will soon wander through became part of a much larger human story. The footprints fade in the twilight, but the journey continues. Somewhere ahead, the rivers still sing, and the herds still move. You take one last step and feel the pulse of ancient migration beneath your soles. It beats softly, steadily, reminding you that every path begins with hunger and ends with discovery. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of pine and distant water. You lift your head, listening to the rustle of leaves and the low hum of insects weaving their evening chorus. The light has softened now, filtering through green canopies that seem endless. You walk deeper, feeling the cool breath of shade, and begin to understand that every sound here carries meaning. This is not chaos. It is conversation. You pause and crouch beside a stream. Its surface mirrors the sky, silver and alive, whispering secrets over smooth stones. You watch how it bends and forks, how the water curves around obstacles instead of fighting them. It feels deliberate, patient. The first peoples watched the land in the same way, learning that it too spoke in patterns. A river that ran wide and shallow meant fish were likely to spawn. A cluster of reeds meant edible roots below. Birds circling high above hinted at carcasses or a nearby herd. The entire wilderness was a living map, and all you had to do was learn to read it. Historians agree that many Native American tribes mastered this silent literacy. They understood the topography of their homeland with astonishing precision, even though they had no compasses or written charts. Hunters could navigate forests by the smell of sap and the tilt of moss. Gatherers remembered exactly when each plant would bloom, sometimes predicting harvests by the feel of wind alone. If modern explorers relied on instruments, these people relied on instinct, tuned by generations of observation. There is one quirky, almost poetic detail about this skill. Some tribal elders taught that the land itself had moods. The sound of birds in the morning might signal that the forest was awake and generous. Silence after sunset could mean that the woods were guarded and watching. These expressions weren't mere metaphor. They were a system of awareness, translating nature's rhythm into human language. To move safely through this world, you had to respect those moods, to listen before you stepped, to ask permission before you took. You walk beside the stream, letting your fingers graze the leaves. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks and the forest answers. You start to realize how much of life depended on listening. The people who once lived here did not see themselves as separate from nature. They were part of its body, its pulse, its voice. A clear example unfolds in your imagination. In the dense eastern woodlands, tribes such as the Iroquois and the Powhatan built villages near rivers not only for water but also for sound. Flowing water helped mask footsteps, allowed safe hunting, and carried messages downstream. You picture them setting fish traps woven from willow branches, the kind that allowed smaller fish to slip through but caught the large ones. No waste, no greed, just balance. Historians still argue whether this kind of knowledge counted as science or spirituality. Some researchers describe it as proto-ecology, a rational system of adaptation based on careful data collection. Others believe it was rooted in ritual and intuition. The line between those worlds is thin, and perhaps it never mattered. What mattered was that the people listened, and in listening, they survived. You keep walking, the forest thickens, and shafts of sunlight pierce through like golden ladders. The air smells of damp earth and crushed fern. Somewhere ahead, a deer snorts softly. You freeze, remembering what you learned from the old hunters. Do not chase. Wait. Watch. Let the world come to you. There is another strange but charming bit of knowledge here. Some tribes reportedly watched squirrels to predict weather. If squirrels gathered pine cones early, winter would be harsh. If they ignored them, a mild season followed. It sounds quaint now, but those predictions were often accurate. The animals were barometers, and the people respected that. You wonder what the forest might tell you now, if you were patient enough to ask. The longer you walk, the clearer the pattern becomes. Every sound is direction. Every scent is hint. The hum of bees leads to flowers, and flowers lead to berries. The tracks of a raccoon might lead you to a creek, which then leads you to fish. Nothing here is random. Even decay is part of a promise, because what rots today will feed something tomorrow. You sit by a fallen log, and imagine how a family might gather in this same spot thousands of years ago. A child learning which mushrooms to pick. A mother pointing to the sky, teaching her son how to tell time by the angle of shadows. A grandfather explaining which plants ease pain and which ones should never be touched. There is something soothing about that continuity, a rhythm of learning passed hand to hand like a shared heartbeat. A fact flickers through your thoughts. Linguists have found that many Native American languages contain verbs where English uses nouns. A mountain stands. A river moves. Even stones rest. This grammatical pattern reveals an old truth. The land was seen as alive. It was not a backdrop but a companion. You can feel that companionship even now as the forest seems to lean closer, listening to your breath. The night begins to rise around you, soft and blue. You hear the steady call of a whippoorwill somewhere in the dark. Its song folds into the quiet, and you realize that you are not alone. Not really. You are surrounded by watchers, foxes hidden behind brush, owls tilting their heads in silence, insects glowing like tiny lanterns. Every one of them part of the same great network, the same web of survival that held the first people safe for centuries. You draw your blanket tighter around your shoulders, or maybe it's just your imagination's comfort. The world here feels both vast and intimate, infinite and close enough to touch. You think of those who came before, who learned to read the language of the land so well they could move through it like wind through grass. It makes you wonder about your own world. When was the last time you listened without expecting words? When was the last time you felt a direction rather than followed a map? The forest hums quietly, as if pleased by your curiosity. The river murmurs a lullaby that has never stopped, not even when cities rose and engines roared. You lie back, gazing at the treetops swaying against a darkening sky, and you feel the same peace those early people must have known. The peace that comes from understanding that the world, if you are quiet enough, will tell you everything you need to know. You wake before dawn, your breath curling in the chill of the forest. The world is painted in blue and silver, and mist clings to the grass like thin silk. You hear a single crack of a branch somewhere ahead. Instinct tells you not to move. You feel your heartbeat in your fingertips. Somewhere out there, an animal is moving too, and for a moment, both of you are bound by the same fragile thread of silence. This is the hour of the hunter. You are not just walking through the wilderness anymore. You are part of it. The air smells of wet earth and cedar sap. The trees loom tall and patient, like elders waiting to see whether you remember the old ways. Hunting was not simply about hunger. It was about observation, preparation, and respect. Every movement had meaning. You could not afford to waste an arrow or a day. In the quiet before the chase, you learn to listen to your breath, to feel the rhythm of the forest, to blend into its pulse. Archaeological records confirm that many Native American hunters developed extraordinary techniques to close the distance between themselves and their prey. They used natural cover, wind direction, and mimicry to become nearly invisible. On the open plains, hunters disguised themselves with animal hides, crawling for hours through tall grass to approach a bison herd. In dense forests, they moved so silently that birds kept singing even as they passed beneath the trees. Their tools were elegant in their simplicity. The spear, the bow, the atlatl that could send a dart flying with deadly speed. Curiously enough, some hunters carried small charms made of feathers, beads, or carved bone. These were not decorations in the modern sense, but tokens of connection to the spirit of the hunt. One old tale tells of a young man who refused to take his mother's bead before a hunt and returned empty-handed. The story is not about luck, but about harmony. The people believed success came from balance between skill and humility. As you tighten your imaginary bowstring, you notice how still the forest becomes. Every leaf seems to hold its breath. The people of long ago must have known this feeling, the quiet before release. When they hunted, it was rarely for sport. Each arrow carried purpose. To kill an animal meant to sustain a family, to honor its spirit, to use every part of it. Waste was a form of disrespect. Most anthropologists agree that this deep respect shaped social rules as much as it did hunting methods. A hunter who disobeyed ritual might face not punishment, but silence, which was worse. To be ignored by the village meant you had lost harmony with both people and nature. You kneel and brush your fingers across the ground. The soil is damp, dark with fallen needles. It would leave almost no sound beneath a careful step. You imagine the hunters training their sons and daughters to walk this way from childhood, to breathe in rhythm with the forest. A broken twig could mean a missed meal. A careless shout could send game running for miles. There's a peculiar image that often appears in the stories of the plains tribes. Hunters would sometimes chase bison toward hidden cliffs, driving the animals into panic until they plunged over the edge. It sounds brutal, but it was efficient and communal. Dozens of families would gather afterward to butcher the fallen animals, giving thanks in ritual before dividing the meat. The place where this was done was considered sacred, not because of blood, but because of life. No one fully agrees on whether this method began as a desperate invention during famine or as an inherited practice refined over centuries. What is certain is that it required precision, courage, and cooperation. It was less a hunt and more a choreographed act of survival, a dance where both human and animal played their roles. You stand now at the edge of an open field. The mist has lifted, and the first light of morning paints the world gold. You can almost see the silhouettes of hunters spreading out across the grass, bows drawn, eyes calm. Their patience is what stands out most. They waited for the right moment, never rushing, never wasting effort. The forest rewarded the patient. It still does. If you listen closely, you might even hear their quiet communication. A click of the tongue, a lifted hand, the twitch of a shoulder. Entire strategies were built on gestures so small they were invisible to outsiders. It is easy to forget that before words, humans spoke in silence, and silence was often enough. It might surprise you to learn that some tribes timed their hunts according to the moon. The glow of its light changed how animals moved, and experienced hunters could predict behavior based on lunar cycles. To them, the sky was part of the same map as the ground. The moon marked not months, but migrations. You walk a little farther and find the remains of a campfire, ancient and cold. You picture hunters warming their hands around the flames, smoke drifting upward to join the stars. They must have told stories there, tales of the one that got away, or the time lightning struck a river and fish floated to the surface, ready to be caught. Every story was a lesson disguised as entertainment. Even now, as you imagine them, the rhythm of the forest begins to lull you. The faint rustle of leaves could almost be a whisper, the snap of a branch, a soft heartbeat. The hunt is no longer violent in your mind. It is graceful, necessary, almost sacred. You look down at your empty hands and realize that survival was never about the weapon. It was about awareness. The people who lived here mastered it so fully that they could predict not just the movement of animals but the moods of the land itself. The wind shifts again. You smell rain coming. Somewhere in that scent is a memory older than any book, older than any map. It tells you to find shelter, to rest, to trust that the forest knows your name. You close your eyes, listening to the quiet that falls after the hunt. The earth exhales, and for a moment, everything feels still. The air is wider here, open and endless. You step from the forest into a rolling sea of grass that sways like water under a sky, so big it feels almost unreal. The wind never stops moving, and neither do the clouds. This is the heart of the Great Plains, where the horizon stretches forever, and the only landmarks are rivers, stars, and memory. You can hear it before you see it, a low, steady rumble that seems to rise from the earth itself. Then the herd appears. Hundreds of bison moving together, their bodies rippling like waves across the prairie. The sound shakes the ground beneath your feet. The first peoples of these plains called the bison many names, each one a word for life. To them, the animal was not simply food. It was warmth, shelter, and story. According to evidence gathered from ancient bone piles and rock art, entire communities once followed the migrations of these herds. They built their calendars around the animals' movements, knowing when to travel, when to rest, and when to prepare for winter. The bison provided everything: meat to eat, hides for clothing, tents, sinew for bowstrings, and bones for tools. Even the dung was dried for fuel when wood was scarce. To waste a part was unthinkable. One lesser-known detail adds a quiet charm to the image. Before the hunt, some tribes, such as the Blackfoot and the Lakota, sang songs to honor the spirit of the herd. These were not victory chants, but lullabies of gratitude. Hunters believed that a calm herd meant a merciful hunt. They asked permission, in their way, before taking life. This act turned survival into ceremony. Ethnographic studies indicate that the hunt itself was a masterpiece of coordination. A single rider might gallop beside a bison, guiding it toward the edge of a hidden cliff, while others waited below to begin the work of butchering. Sometimes entire villages participated, the elders watching from the ridges while children gathered stones to drive the animals forward. The effort united everyone, young and old. It was dangerous, exhausting, but also joyful. Success meant survival through the cold months ahead. Debate still lingers among experts about whether these large-scale hunts began as necessity or celebration. Some historians suggest they occurred mainly when herds were abundant, allowing communities to stockpile resources. Others think they were timed with ritual festivals to honor ancestral spirits. The truth might rest in both interpretations, woven together like the grass and wind of the plains. You sit down for a moment, the sun warm on your shoulders. You imagine what it must have been like to live here without fences, moving with the herds rather than against them. Every dawn carried possibility, every sunset reward. Children learned early how to track by reading the crushed grass and the direction of dust drifting through the air. Mothers cooked meat over open fires, preserving what they could with smoke and salt. Fathers repaired bows and arrows, teaching patience above all. It might surprise you to learn that tribes also used fire to manage the land. By setting controlled burns, they encouraged new grass to grow, attracting bison and deer. Modern ecologists now recognize how advanced that practice was. Fire wasn't destruction, it was renewal, a way to keep the earth fertile and the herds healthy. The people who lived here understood that nature responded to balance, not dominance. You start walking again, and the wind presses against your face like a living thing. You can almost feel the thunder of hooves echoing beneath the soil. These animals shaped the heartbeat of the continent. Without them, much of the culture that thrived here could not have existed. The bison was not just a creature to be hunted, it was a teacher, showing people how to live in rhythm with the seasons. There's a moment you can almost see in your mind's eye. The sun dipping low, the air thick with dust, hunters on horseback riding side by side, their faces streaked with clay to blend with the land, the smell of sweat and grass and fear mingling together. Then the release, the sprint, the shout that rises from the gut more than the throat. Arrows fly, hooves strike, and the sound of life fills the valley. It is wild and beautiful and terrifying all at once. When it ends, there is quiet again. Smoke rises from distant fires as families begin the work of skinning and drying meat. The children laugh, chasing each other through the grass while the elders hum low songs that blend with the wind. This, you realize, is not just survival, it is community. The hunt brings everyone together, reminding them that no one lives alone out here. According to oral traditions preserved through generations, some tribes believed the Great Spirit sent the bison as a living bridge between earth and sky. Its breath was wind, its bones were hills. Its death, when done with respect, renewed the world. You can feel that reverence in the air even now, as if the prairie itself remembers. As night begins to fall, the horizon glows deep orange, then violet. The grass whispers against your legs as you walk. The wind carries the scent of smoke from cooking fires, faint but comforting. You imagine the taste of roasted meat, the laughter of tired hunters, the soft hum of gratitude that follows the day's work. You lie down in the tall grass and stare at the stars as they appear one by one. The same stars the hunters once used to navigate the plains, to find their way home. The same stars that still shine over their descendants, who continue to honor those old ways in stories, ceremonies, and songs. The night wraps around you gently. You close your eyes, hearing the distant echo of hooves, the wind that never truly stops, and the quiet pride of a people who learn to live in partnership with the endless sky. You wake to the scent of salt in the air. The wind has changed, cooler and sharper, filled with the cry of gulls and the endless rhythm of waves folding over themselves. The forest has faded behind you now, replaced by wide beaches of pebbled grey and seaweed green. The ocean stretches out before you, vast and unknowable, yet generous in its own way. This is where the northern and coastal peoples made their lives, where fishing was not a task but a partnership with the tides. The morning light glitters on the water like a sheet of broken glass. You step closer and feel the cold spray touch your skin. It smells alive, metallic, and clean. Farther down the shore, a group of people move in rhythm, pulling a heavy net between them. They work silently, communicating through gestures and glances, the same way generations before them did. Historical evidence suggests that many coastal tribes such as the Haida, Tlingit, and Makah built entire economies around the sea. Their canoes, carved from massive cedar trunks, could glide through fog and current with remarkable balance. Each canoe was shaped according to the purpose of its voyage: narrow ones for river travel, wide ones for hunting whales, and larger ceremonial canoes for trade. To see them moving across the water must have looked like a procession of floating sculptures, each stroke of the paddle both art and necessity. There is an unexpected custom that adds texture to this watery world. Before venturing out, some fishers touched their paddles to the sea and whispered a short blessing, a quiet conversation with the waves. It was believed that if you spoke too loudly before launching, the spirits beneath the water might grow jealous and turn the weather foul. Respecting the sea was not superstition but etiquette, a way of remembering who truly held power out there. Excavations have shown that nets were made from plant fibers and animal sinew, twisted by hand and repaired after each use. Fish traps built from stone or woven wood-lined riverbanks, catching salmon as they returned to spawn. These methods required patience and deep understanding of seasonal cycles. Knowing exactly when to cast a net or when to wait was a skill honed over centuries. Some of those traps still exist today, half buried in silt, their shapes visible only when the tide retreats far enough to reveal the bones of old craftsmanship. Specialists continue to explore competing explanations for how early peoples in the Arctic regions adapted to such cold, unpredictable waters. Some suggest they relied heavily on seals and whales, crafting harpoons tipped with bone or ivory that could pierce thick hides. Others believe their diet was far more diverse, mixing fish, seaweed, and land mammals in equal measure. The truth may be as varied as the coastline itself. What remains certain is that survival along these icy shores required both courage and cooperation. You watch as the fishers haul their nets ashore. Silver bodies flash in the light, each one a small miracle. They move efficiently, cleaning, gutting, and smoking the catch before the sun rises too high. Smoke curls into the air, carrying the rich scent of salt and fat. The process is methodical, but reverent. Every movement acknowledges that life has been taken to sustain life. It might amuse you to know that some stories claim fishermen could predict storms by the way the kelp drifted in shallow water. If the strands floated close to shore, the sea would stay calm. If they drifted outward, a storm was already forming beyond the horizon. Whether that was true or not, those stories reveal how finely tuned the people were to the smallest details of their world. Nothing was random. Everything had meaning. You walk along the beach and find fragments of shell and bone, each one shaped by hands long gone. A tiny fish hook carved from bird bone, a fragment of pottery, smooth from centuries of waves. You imagine the people who made them, sitting by the fire at night, repairing their gear and talking softly about the day. Maybe they laughed about the one that got away or whispered thanks for the one that did not. According to oral histories passed down among coastal nations, the ocean was not a boundary but a pathway. It connected villages and families across hundreds of miles. Canoes traveled along invisible highways of current, carrying dried fish, woven blankets, and carved ornaments for trade. These journeys were as social as they were practical. They carried news, marriages, songs, and laughter. The sea, far from isolating, made the world larger and more connected. You stop to watch the horizon again. The color of the water shifts from deep blue to gray, mirroring the clouds that gather above. A cold mist rolls in, softening every edge. It is not a storm, just the sea breathing. The wind touches your hair and brings with it the faint cry of distant seals. You imagine the hunters who once waited by breathing holes in the ice, harpoon poised, listening for the soft exhale that would give away their prey. They must have had patience beyond anything we can imagine today. There is a quiet wisdom in this place. You can feel it in the rhythm of the waves, the slow inhale and exhale that has never changed. Life here was about timing, not force. The people knew when to take and when to wait, when to trust the sea and when to fear it. Even today, descendants of those fishers still honor the ocean, offering small gifts before casting their nets, telling stories that keep the balance alive. As the day fades, the sky turns the color of steel. You can taste salt on your lips and hear the slow sigh of the tide pulling back. Somewhere out there, whales breach, their breath rising like mist against the fading light. You can almost see the canoes gliding over the dark water, paddles dipping in perfect rhythm, their silhouettes merging with the sea until it becomes impossible to tell where humanity ends and nature begins. The last sound before night settles is the whisper of the waves brushing the shore, as gentle as breathing. It feels like an old friend's voice, one that will be waiting again at dawn. The sun climbs higher, and the air turns dry. The smell of salt fades, replaced by dust and sage. Ahead, the land opens into an endless stretch of ochre and stone. You squint against the light, shielding your eyes as the desert begins to shimmer. It looks empty at first glance, a wasteland painted in heat and silence. But as you step forward, you start to see signs of life hiding in plain sight. A lizard flicks across your path. A cactus blooms with waxy flowers, guarded by spines that glint like glass. Even in this unforgiving landscape, there is abundance for those who know how to look. Cultural historians point out that the desert tribes of the American Southwest, such as the ancestral Puebloans, the Hohokam, and later the Apache and Navajo, built entire worlds within this seeming emptiness. They knew how to listen to the rhythm of wind and sun, how to turn scarcity into wisdom. Their homes carved into cliffs shaded by stone. Their paths followed the faint green promise of rivers that only flowed part of the year. To outsiders, it was survival against the odds. To them, it was home. An odd but delightful detail survives in some oral accounts. It might surprise you to learn that desert travelers sometimes carried balls of dried cactus pulp soaked in water. These small bundles acted as emergency canteens. When thirst struck and no spring was near, they could chew the pulp slowly, releasing moisture without wasting a drop. The thought of it makes your throat ache, but it shows the precision of their understanding. Every plant here was a teacher. Researchers have documented that early desert farmers were among the first in North America to engineer irrigation systems. They carved canals through rock and clay, guiding seasonal floods to their fields. Corn, beans, and squash grew beside patches of amaranth and wild tobacco. They even cultivated cotton, weaving it into cloth long before Europeans arrived. What looks barren to modern eyes was, in their hands, a living network of soil, seed, and patience. No one fully agrees on what caused some of the early desert civilizations to move on. Archaeologists have found signs of drought, others evidence of conflict or simple migration. Some scholars believe the land itself changed, drying faster than people could adapt. Others think communities simply followed their seasonal logic, leaving behind homes that were meant to be temporary all along. The ruins remain as quiet puzzles, their stories half buried in sand and sunlight. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow. The heat presses down, thick and steady, but it is not without beauty. The air shimmers like glass, distorting the horizon. Somewhere ahead, a dust devil dances, spinning like a playful ghost. You move closer to a cluster of prickly pear cactus, their pads heavy with red fruit. The fruit bleeds like rubies when you cut it open. The people who lived here knew exactly when to harvest it. Too early, and it was bitter. Too late, and the birds would take it all. Timing meant everything. There is a practical poetry in the way they lived. Even the smallest act carried intention. Gathering meant learning which shadows lasted longest, which stones hid cool water underneath. Night travel was often safer than day travel. By the light of the moon, the desert softened, and the stars became a guidebook. You can almost see the outlines of travelers moving in silence, the glow of starlight on their faces, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. An old story from the Navajo tells of a time when the desert refused to give rain. The people prayed and sang, but the clouds stayed thin and hard. Then a coyote came and stole the sun, plunging the world into darkness. Only when the people promised to share their food with all living creatures did the coyote return the light. Whether you take it as myth or metaphor, the lesson is clear. In the desert, greed is fatal. Only generosity allows survival. It might sound impossible, but even in this harshness, life thrived. There were mesquite pods ground into flour, agave roasted into sweet fiber, and rabbits trapped with woven snares. Hunters used darts tipped with obsidian, their edges sharper than steel. The gleam of a well-cut point under the sun was a thing of deadly beauty. Debate among archaeologists continues over how much trade connected these desert cultures with distant regions. Some say they reached as far as the Pacific coast, exchanging shells for turquoise. Others believe the trade networks extended north toward the plains, where salt and hides were swapped for obsidian and woven goods. Each new discovery adds another line to the invisible map that once tied so many people together. You find a patch of shade beneath a sandstone ledge. The stone radiates warmth, like the memory of the day stored within it. You close your eyes and listen. There is almost no sound, only the faint sigh of wind moving through dry grass. Yet even that silence holds information. The desert speaks, but softly. You have to be patient to hear it. When evening comes, the light changes. The world turns the color of copper and blood. Long shadows stretch across the sand, and the temperature begins to drop. The sky burns red, then violet, then black. Stars appear like a spill of salt across a dark table. The desert night is so clear that you feel as though you could fall upward into the sky itself. You picture a small campfire flickering in the distance. A group sits around it, roasting cactus fruit and rabbit, their laughter carried away by the wind. Above them, the constellations form old patterns that no telescope could ever replace. Each star marks a season, a memory, a promise that morning will return. Out here, survival is not about power but partnership. Every grain of sand holds a story, every gust of wind a whisper. You lie back and watch the stars, feeling the desert breathe around you, ancient and eternal. Morning arrives wrapped in mist and birdsong. You awaken in a gentler place now, where the air feels cool and damp, and the ground is soft beneath your feet. The forest here is alive with rustling leaves, and the hum of insects rising with the Sunday. A light rain has just passed, leaving the scent of soil and wildflowers hanging in the air. Every surface glistens. The trunks of oak and maple trees are streaked with water, and between them stretches a green abundance that seems endless. You are in the old eastern woodlands, home to tribes like the Iroquois, the Cherokee, and the Powhatan. The people who lived here moved through a world that offered both challenge and generosity. Food was plentiful, yet it demanded care. The forest could feed, but it could also deceive. The berries you picked might heal, or they might harm. The mushrooms that looked safe could be fatal. Knowing the difference was the difference between life and death. Ethnographers have written that these communities practiced a kind of quiet cultivation, long before Europeans called it agriculture. They managed the land with subtlety rather than control. Corn, beans, and squash grew together in what later became known as the Three Sisters. Each plant supported the others. The corn provided a stalk for the beans to climb. The beans enriched the soil with nitrogen. The squash, spreading low, shaded the earth and kept it moist. It was a lesson in cooperation, both botanical and human. One charming bit of field wisdom says that some farmers sang to their crops. The songs were not prayers for miracles, but a way to measure rhythm and time. Work was paced by melody. A slow tune meant steady progress. A fast one meant celebration. Even now, when you walk through a garden at dusk, you can imagine those same tunes drifting through the trees, soft and contented. Excavations in river valleys show storage pits filled with nuts, seeds, and dried berries, protected from damp by woven mats of bark. This was how people prepared for the long winters when snow would blanket the ground and food vanished beneath ice. They planned not just for the next meal, but for the next season. To live well here meant thinking months ahead, seeing time not as a straight line, but as a circle that always came back to the same place. Anthropologists remain divided on the question of how to describe this relationship with the land. Some call it horticulture, others call it forest gardening. The difference lies in intention. Did they plant deliberately, or did they simply encourage what was already growing? Perhaps both are true. The result was harmony, a system where human touch enhanced rather than erased the natural balance. You follow a narrow trail through the trees, and the ground squishes slightly underfoot. Ferns brush against your legs, and the canopy filters sunlight into soft green patterns. Here and there, small clearings open up where families might once have lived. The homes were built from wood and bark, shaped like long domes to shed rain and trap warmth. Smoke would have drifted from small holes at the top, carrying the scent of cooking cornmeal and drying meat. It might amuse you to know that some of these woodland dwellers used raccoons as unofficial sentinels. Their sharp hearing and mischievous curiosity made them excellent alarms against predators or rival camps. If a raccoon suddenly vanished from view or began chattering wildly, everyone knew something or someone was moving in the dark. Even the animals, it seemed, joined in the defense of the home. Researchers have noted that community life here was woven around sharing. One person's harvest was everyone's security. Food was stored communally, distributed according to need rather than ownership. A successful hunter brought meat back not for glory but for generosity. To take more than you could use was to invite misfortune. The rules were simple and strict, but they kept hunger at bay and peace within reach. You find yourself beside a small river, its current gentle and clear. The sound is soothing, almost hypnotic. You kneel to touch the water, cold and alive, and watch as it carries leaves and bits of pollen downstream. This river was once the center of everything. It provided fish, power, and transport. Villages grew along its banks, and trails branched outward like veins. Life pulsed through these waterways just as surely as it did through the people who lived beside them. There is a curious image that stays in your mind. On quiet evenings, families would gather near the edge of their fields. The last light of day would turn the corn gold, and the smell of roasted squash would drift through the air. Children chased fireflies, while elders told stories about the first seeds planted by spirits. Each tale was a memory disguised as magic, a way to pass knowledge without lecturing. No one fully agrees on when these agricultural practices began to blend with larger trade networks. Some historians say it happened through marriage alliances. Others claim through traveling healers who carried seeds and stories from one tribe to another. However it began, it spread like wind through grass, linking distant communities through a shared language of cultivation. You sit on a fallen log and look around. The forest feels both wild and tended. The trees stand in loose patterns that seem natural but are not. Someone, long ago, guided which saplings to leave and which to cut, shaping the forest into a living orchard. It is a subtle kind of genius, invisible unless you know where to look. As dusk approaches, fireflies appear like floating embers. Their light flickers against your skin, warm and brief. You can hear a flute playing somewhere far away, a soft melody that rises and falls like breath. You imagine people sitting in a circle near their fires, their faces glowing, their voices low with laughter. The night hums with peace, a peace earned by patience and respect. You realize that in this world, survival was not a battle, but a conversation. The land listened, and so did the people. Together, they created a rhythm of giving and receiving that lasted for generations. The rain begins again, soft as a lullaby, and you let it fall across your face, grateful for the same water that once fed their fields. The morning light filters through the trees like strands of gold. You can hear the faint chatter of birds waking, and the forest hums with quiet life. The path ahead is narrow, winding between ferns and wildflowers, and you follow it slowly, breathing in the damp, sweet air. Somewhere nearby, laughter rises, soft and familiar. It is the sound of women at work, their voices carrying through the leaves like music. In nearly every community across this vast land, women were the keepers of knowledge about the earth's gifts. Their hands knew the difference between a root that heals and one that harms, between a berry that nourishes and one that deceives. They were scientists in their own right, though they would never have called themselves that. Generations of observation and memory lived in their gestures, their baskets, and their stories. Archaeological findings reveal that women's gathering accounted for the majority of daily sustenance in many tribes. Hunting provided bursts of abundance, but gathering was constant, steady, and reliable. While hunters ranged far, women stayed near rivers, meadows, and woodlands, weaving the fabric of survival through patience rather than risk. They collected acorns, berries, tubers, wild onions, and grains. They learned to recognize each plant not by sight alone but by smell, texture, and the faint taste of sap on the tongue. It might surprise you to learn that some tribes marked the seasons not by the movement of stars, but by the bloom of specific plants. When the first choke cherries ripened, summer had reached its peak. When the milkweed pods split, it was time to harvest fibers for thread. Nature was their calendar, each petal and seed a silent reminder of time passing. One delightful detail found in several oral traditions describes how some women chewed certain kinds of bark before long walks. The bark released a mild, refreshing sap that kept thirst away. It is such a small, clever thing, the kind of wisdom modern travelers might overlook entirely. Yet this habit carried generations through long journeys and dry seasons without complaint. Ethnographic records note that these women often worked together, sharing what they found rather than keeping it secret. Gathering was not solitary. It was social, rhythmic, and filled with song. Each song had purpose, its melody shaped to match the rhythm of bending and rising, of cutting and cleaning. The forest listened and answered with its own chorus. You can almost hear it now, a call and response between human and earth. Opinions remain split among scholars about how this gathering knowledge was passed on. Some believe it followed matrilineal lines, mothers teaching daughters in sacred ceremony. Others think it was a communal process, open to all who were willing to learn. What is clear is that no book or scroll was ever needed. The knowledge lived in action, in memory, in repetition, until it became instinct. You walk into a clearing where the sunlight pours down in warm sheets. A group of women kneel in the grass, their hands busy sorting leaves and roots into woven baskets. Children play nearby, helping in small ways, laughing as they mimic their mother's movements. It is a quiet but powerful scene, filled with purpose and grace. According to oral stories preserved by tribes in the northeast, every plant had a spirit. Before harvesting, gatherers would speak a few gentle words, acknowledging the plant's life and asking its permission. The belief was simple. If you asked kindly and took only what you needed, the plant would grow again, stronger. This philosophy created a balance that modern sustainability movements are only beginning to understand. One story tells of a young woman who once gathered without saying her thanks. When she returned home, her basket seemed full, but by morning, the roots had turned to dust. It is a cautionary tale, a gentle warning wrapped in myth. The message is timeless. Take without gratitude, and the world will remember. The sun climbs higher as you continue walking, You pass through patches of wild mint, its fragrance waking your senses. Bees drift lazily from flower to flower. Every part of this place feels alive and aware, as if watching you. You begin to notice how gathering requires not dominance but attention. It is about moving slowly, feeling the weight of each moment, listening before acting. It might amuse you to know that some women used animal behavior as guides to find edible plants. If deer grazed on certain leaves or birds pecked certain seeds, they knew it was safe to follow their example. The forest's animals were teachers, and the people were excellent students. They understood that intelligence was not measured by speech or tools, but by harmony. You imagine the baskets now, brimming with color, red berries, golden roots, green herbs glistening with dew. These baskets were more than containers. They were extensions of the hands that made them. Woven from reeds, grasses, or bark, each one carried patterns unique to its maker. The designs told stories of family, of land, of belonging. Researchers have noted that such basketry was often accompanied by storytelling. As women worked, they passed along lessons in the form of tales. A story about a jealous plant might warn against greed. A story about a kind animal might teach compassion. The children who listened did not just learn facts, they learned values. As the day wanes, the women begin to head home, their baskets balanced gracefully on their backs. The air smells of crushed herbs and wood smoke from distant fires. The forest glows gold in the fading light. You follow quietly, feeling a kind of peace that comes only from understanding your place in the world. The gathering has ended, but the rhythm remains. It lingers in your ears like a heartbeat, slow and steady, reminding you that survival is not always a battle or a chase. Sometimes it is the simple, gentle act of knowing when to pick, when to wait, and when to give thanks. Night gathers over the trees, wrapping the world in blue. The first stars appear, and you imagine those same women looking up, whispering to the sky, grateful for another day of enough. The firelight flickers in the darkness, painting soft shapes on the walls of a small shelter. You sit close to the warmth, feeling the smoke curl upward and drift into the cold night air. The scent of wood and drying meat hangs heavy around you, rich and comforting. This is where the real art of survival begins, in the glow of flame and the patience of preparation. Out there in the wilderness, finding food is only half the story. Keeping it safe for the hard months ahead is what truly matters. According to historical accounts from early explorers, native peoples across the Americas mastered food preservation long before refrigeration or metal storage. They smoked fish beside rivers, dried fruit in the sun, and buried corn in sealed pits lined with grass. Every region had its own methods, refined over generations, each one shaped by the landscape's rhythm. A meal caught in summer could still feed a family in the heart of winter. An unexpected custom noted by early travelers describes how some northern tribes used frozen animal bladders to store fish oil and berries. The bladders, once cleaned and tied, became natural jars that could survive both freezing and thawing. It sounds peculiar, but it worked beautifully. Nothing was wasted, not even what modern minds might find strange. In a world where every resource mattered, ingenuity was simply common sense. Cultural historians point out that preservation was not just about survival, but community. Families gathered around smokehouses and drying racks, working together from dawn until dusk. The tasks were shared and rhythmic. Someone kept the fire at the right temperature, another sliced meat into thin strips, another sang to keep the children awake and cheerful. These were long, patient hours, filled with stories, laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of purpose. Academics still weigh conflicting evidence about when these techniques first appeared. Some say they began as emergency responses to famine, while others argue they evolved naturally alongside the seasons. Whatever the origin, The result was the same, a culture of foresight. Food was more than nourishment, it was memory. It carried the warmth of hands that prepared it, and the echo of fires that once glowed beneath the stars. You can almost see it now, thin sheets of salmon hanging over smoky embers, turning slowly from silver to deep orange. Strips of venison drying on racks, stiffening in the wind. Rows of corn tied into braids and hung from rafters, their yellow kernels shining like beads. Each item has its own place, its own time. Nothing happens in haste. It might surprise you to learn that some tribes preserved berries by mixing them with animal fat and pounded meat to create pemmican. This mixture could last for months, even years, and travelers carried it across mountains and plains. A small piece held enough energy to keep a person walking all day. It was both food and medicine, a miracle of simplicity and endurance. You crouch closer to the fire, hearing it crackle. The sound is timeless. The same noise once filled 1,000 camps, keeping fear at bay through the long nights. Smoke curls around you, and for a moment you can almost smell the faint sweetness of maple sap boiling into syrup. In the northeastern woodlands, that scent meant spring was coming, and with it, renewal. Somewhere nearby, you imagine a grandmother teaching her granddaughter how to wrap herbs in bark, to dry them for healing. The lesson is quiet, tender, and patient. This is how knowledge survived through the warmth of storytelling, not through instruction. Recipes were remembered by rhythm, by scent, by the feel of a plant in the hand. Excavations have revealed storage pits lined with woven mats and sealed with clay. When opened months later, the food inside would still be fresh. It was a miracle of engineering disguised as tradition. Each tribe adapted its method to fit the world around it. In the humid south, smoke and salt were essential. In the arid deserts, the sun itself did the work. In the far north, cold became the greatest ally. The same principle preserved today to survive tomorrow bound them all together. There is a comforting hum in that idea. Every bite of stored food carried the memory of cooperation. Each winter meal told a story of summer labor. Preservation, in this way, became not only practical but spiritual. It taught patience, gratitude, and humility. You reach for an image that lingers in your mind. Families sitting together around low fires, sharing strips of dried meat and handfuls of nuts, while snow drifts against the walls. Outside, the world is silent except for the wind. Inside there is warmth, laughter, and the faint murmur of a story told for the 100th time. Curiously enough, some accounts mention that hunters returning with their kill were welcomed not by cheers, but by quiet songs. The noise could anger the spirits of the animals, so celebration was gentle. Joy had to be balanced with respect. Even in victory, they remembered loss. You sit back and let the warmth sink into your bones. The fire pops softly, sending sparks spiraling upward. Each spark feels like a tiny star trying to return home. You realize that in these small acts, drying, smoking, storing there, lies a kind of faith. It is belief in tomorrow, in continuity, in the idea that effort today will feed the next generation. The night deepens. The stars glint through gaps in the smoke. The scent of preservation is heavy in the air. Salt, fat, smoke, and something sweet. It is the smell of resilience. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls. The sound drifts across the forest like a slow reminder that time is always moving, that the seasons will change again soon. You close your eyes and listen to the fire's soft rhythm, the heartbeat of every camp that has ever faced the long winter with full stores and steady hope. The wind has quieted, and the fire burns low. The night feels thick, almost sacred, as if the air itself is listening. You can smell smoke, leather, and the faint sweetness of sage drifting upward into the dark. Around you, the camp has gone still, except for a few hushed voices. It is time for the sacred part of life in the wilderness. The moment when the hunters and gatherers pause not to work, but to give thanks. According to oral traditions carried through many nations, The hunt was never just an act of survival. It was a spiritual conversation between humans and the living world. The people saw animals not as resources but as relatives. To take a life meant entering a relationship, one that required reverence and care. Before a hunt, the hunters often purified themselves with smoke or water, cleansing both body and spirit so that no arrogance traveled with them. The goal was not conquest but harmony. It might surprise you to know that in some communities, hunters avoided eating certain meats before setting out. They believed the taste could confuse their senses or offend the spirits of the animals they sought. Some even avoided direct eye contact with their weapons until the ritual blessing was complete. Everything had intention. Every step carried meaning. Ethnographic accounts record that before a successful hunt, tribes like the Ojibwe and the Cree offered prayers or songs to the spirit of the animal. If a deer fell, its head was lifted toward the sky, so that its soul could find its way home. Hunters placed small gifts beside the carcass, a handful of tobacco, a carved bead, a whisper of gratitude. This act was not superstition. It was etiquette, a kind of moral contract with the unseen forces that kept the world alive. Scholars continue to puzzle over whether these ceremonies began as practical customs to maintain ecological balance or as expressions of genuine faith. Perhaps it was both. To respect an animal was to ensure it would return. To live without reverence risked scarcity. Survival and belief intertwined so tightly that one could not exist without the other. You can almost feel that weight now as you imagine the circle of hunters gathered in silence after the day's work. Their faces are calm, illuminated by firelight, and their shadows stretch long across the ground. The air is thick with the smell of blood and smoke, yet there is no violence here, only acknowledgement. Someone begins to hum, low and steady, a tune that rises like wind through pine branches. The others join, each voice blending into a single tone that vibrates in your chest. It is not music for entertainment, but for balance. According to stories shared among plains tribes, animals once spoke directly to people. They taught humans how to hunt, what to eat, and how to honor the circle of life. The people promised to remember, to hunt only what they needed, and to use everything they took. For a time, balance was perfect. But the stories warn that if humans ever forget their part of the promise, the animals will fall silent again. Listening becomes the test. You watch the embers pulse like small hearts. The night is cold, but the warmth reaches you in waves. Each crack of the fire sounds like the earth exhaling. It reminds you that this ritual is not about sadness or guilt, it is about connection. When a hunter eats, they believe the spirit of the animal joins their body, carrying its strength into their muscles and their dreams. Death, in this view, is not an ending but a continuation. An old legend from the Pacific Northwest tells of a young man who killed a bear without offering thanks. That night, he dreamed of the bear walking into his lodge, its eyes full of sorrow. When he woke, he found his arrows shattered, his traps empty. Only when he sang a song of apology did the forest welcome him again. It is a haunting image, but a gentle one. The story teaches that gratitude heals both sides of the exchange. Researchers have noted that this deep spirituality influenced not only hunting but also social organization. The person who made the kill did not own the meat. Instead, it was shared according to need, ensuring fairness. The hunter gained honor not from possession, but from generosity. Even today, many indigenous communities preserve this tradition, blending it into modern celebrations and feasts. It might amuse you to know that some hunters believed dreams could foretell the outcome of a hunt. If you dreamed of an eagle, it meant success was near. If you dreamed of falling water, it meant patience was required. The language of dreams was considered a dialogue with the spirits, and those who could interpret them were valued as guides and counselors. As the night deepens, you feel a stillness settle in your chest. The forest around you has grown quiet, as if the entire world is holding its breath. You think of the countless nights when fires like this one burned across the continent, from tundra to desert, from mountain to shore. Each one was a small flame against the vast darkness, each one carrying the same message: respect, gratitude, renewal. The ritual ends not with words but with silence. The hunters bow their heads, the fire crackles, and the night resumes its breathing. The stars above seem closer now, watching, listening, forgiving. You close your eyes and sense how all these acts, small, simple, and humble, wove humanity into the great circle of life. When you open your eyes again, the embers are fading, and the first hint of dawn glows on the horizon. The fire has given its light back to the sky. You rise slowly, stretch your limbs, and feel the cold air settle around you. Somewhere behind you, the camp stirs, ready to begin another day. But for this moment, you stay still. You let the last warmth of the fire seep into your skin. You think of all the lives that have passed through these same motions, whispering to the spirits, sharing what they had, and finding peace in the cycle. The wilderness is quiet again, but the echo of their gratitude lingers, soft and steady, like a heartbeat that never truly stops. The sun rises slowly, spilling gold across the horizon. Dew glitters on the grass, and the first warmth of morning settles over the camp. You stretch and breathe deeply, taking in the scent of smoke and earth, and for a moment the world feels brand new. Around you, people begin to stir. A few carry tools, others kneel to sharpen blades or check bundles of hides. The day's rhythm is beginning again. Excavations have revealed that tools were more than objects for survival. They were extensions of the body and the imagination. A flint blade was as intimate as a hand, shaped carefully through hours of patient work. The people who made them understood stone the way modern craftsmen understand engines or metal. They listened to the sound each strike made, adjusting angle and pressure until the stone split just right. The rhythm of the work was like drumming: crack, pause, breathe, and strike again. Curiously enough, the debris from this process, tiny flakes of stone scattered like glitter across ancient campsites, tells us almost everything about how they lived. Those flakes are the footprints of thought, the residue of creation. Each shard represents an attempt, a correction, a whisper of problem-solving older than writing itself. Archaeological evidence shows that the earliest toolmakers across the Americas used local materials whenever possible: obsidian from volcanic regions, quartz from riverbeds, chert from open plains. They traded stones across great distances, proof of both cooperation and curiosity. A piece of obsidian found in Illinois once traveled over 1,000 miles from the Rocky Mountains, passed hand to hand until it reached a hunter who admired its sheen. That small piece of glass-like rock carried stories no one can fully recover. Debate among anthropologists continues over how complex these early technologies truly were. Some argue that their refinement rivaled the finest stonework of Europe or Asia. Others believe the tools were simple by necessity, designed for quick repair and constant movement. What remains certain is that they were effective. With nothing but bone, stone, and sinew, these people built worlds. You crouch beside one of the toolmakers, watching as she selects a stone. Her hands are steady and her eyes calm. She studies the surface, taps lightly, and begins to shape it. The sound is soothing. Chips fly in tiny bursts of light. The blade begins to form, thin and sharp as a leaf. It is not brute force that guides her, but intuition. She knows the stone's weaknesses, its veins, its hidden temper. To break it is to understand it. It might surprise you to learn that in many tribes, tool-making was accompanied by quiet ritual. A few words were spoken before beginning, asking the earth to bless the work. Some toolmakers refused to speak at all during the process, believing silence would help their focus. Others sang softly, believing rhythm steadied their hands. These customs turned labor into meditation, each tool becoming not just an object, but a promise. Researchers have found that bone tools were just as essential as stone. From antler and rib came awls for sewing hides, fish hooks, needles, and ornaments. These items blurred the line between practicality and beauty. A comb carved from deer bone might also be engraved with a pattern of stars. A spear point might be painted with a line of red clay, marking the maker's spirit. Art and function were not separate here. They were the same thing. An old story from the Great Lakes region tells of a woman who dropped her stone knife into a river. She wept, believing the spirit of the tool would be lost. But when she returned days later, the knife lay on the bank, glinting in the sunlight. She understood then that the earth takes back what it lends, only to return it when respect has been shown. Whether true or not, the story captures something eternal. Every tool was part of a conversation with the land. According to cultural historians, this reverence extended even to repair and reuse. A broken point was not discarded, but reshaped. A dull edge became a scraper. The people did not see waste, only transformation. It was a philosophy of resilience, an understanding that every ending could become a beginning again. You walk past rows of tools laid out in the sun, drying after cleaning. The light catches the edges and makes them glow. It is almost hypnotic, the way order emerges from fragments. The toolmakers talk quietly, their words mixing with the sounds of children playing and the crackle of small fires. The air feels balanced, like everything in its right place. Anthropologists have noted that the complexity of these tools often reflected the environment. In cold regions, blades were small and efficient, made for cutting thick hides. In warmer lands, larger blades suited for plant gathering and woodworking were more common. The land dictated the shape of survival, and people listened. You pause by a young boy practicing with a small bow. His arrows are blunt, made for training. Each shot flies short and wobbly, but his concentration is fierce. Behind him, an elder watches with quiet pride. You realize that every skill, every piece of craftsmanship, was taught the same way, by doing, by failing, and by trying again. There were no manuals, no drawings, only memory and patience. It might amuse you to imagine how tool-making must have sounded across generations. The click of stone, the rasp of bone, the low murmur of conversation. Each sound carried history forward. When night came, the day's work was cleaned, admired, and often blessed before being stored away. Some tools were buried with their owners, believed to help them continue their journey beyond this life. As the day fades, you sit once more beside the fire. The toolmakers have finished for now. The light catches the sharp edges of their work, and they gleam like stars scattered across the ground. The forest hums with twilight, and the sound of insects rises to meet the sigh of wind. You look at the tools and see more than weapons. You see ingenuity, discipline, and love of craft. You begin to understand that survival was never just about endurance. It was about creation. To shape the world with one's hands, to transform stone into song and bone into beauty, that was what kept humanity alive. The flames flicker, and you close your eyes, hearing the faint tap of a hammerstone echo somewhere far back in time, shaping the next morning before it even arrives. The river catches the morning light like a ribbon of polished glass. You follow its curve as it winds through meadows and valleys, its surface reflecting the slow drift of clouds. The air smells of wet stone and alder bark, and in the distance, you hear the hollow sound of paddles striking water. Traders are coming, their canoes heavy with goods, voices rising in greeting long before they arrive. Archaeological discoveries confirm that rivers were the earliest highways of the Americas. Long before horses or roads, trade moved on water. Canoes carved from cedar and birch carried families, goods, and stories from one village to another. The rivers linked not only regions but worlds, connecting the Arctic tundra to the Gulf Coast, the Pacific shore to the Great Lakes. What began as survival grew into culture, and what began as a need became an art of connection. One unusual but fascinating practice involved the use of trade songs. Travelers would sing specific melodies as they approached a friendly village, the rhythm and tune signaling peaceful intent. These songs worked like passports, instantly identifying where a trader came from and what goods they likely carried. The wrong song, however, could raise suspicion, so accuracy was essential. Even the youngest paddlers learned to hum the right greeting before they could swim. Ethnographic studies indicate that trade was never only about material exchange. It was also about news, alliances, and stories. A single canoe might carry not just baskets of dried salmon or bundles of fur, but also tales of new births, distant storms, or a dispute settled in another camp. When a trader arrived, they brought the outside world with them, a ripple of fresh knowledge spreading across every fire circle they visited. Theories differ on how far these networks truly reached. Some researchers argue that shell ornaments found deep inland prove trade routes stretched from coast to coast. Others believe that items passed slowly, village to village, over generations rather than through grand expeditions. Either way, the flow of goods and ideas was constant, like the current itself. No community stood entirely alone. You can almost see the scene unfolding before you now. Canoes gliding across the water, their painted hulls shining in the sunday. Men and women leaning forward in rhythm, paddles dipping cleanly into the river. When they reach the bank, laughter fills the air as families meet and inspect the wares. There are piles of obsidian, bright shells, woven mats, and smoked fish. Children dart between traders, fascinated by beads from faraway lands. The entire scene hums with life and generosity. According to oral histories, the arrival of traders was treated as a celebration. Guests were fed first, given a place by the fire, and welcomed with open hands. In return, they offered gifts that symbolized friendship, carved ornaments, painted stones, or small tools. These gifts were not payment but promises, tokens that bound communities together through respect. It might surprise you to learn that certain tribes used smoke signals to announce trading arrivals along river routes. Each pattern of smoke had meaning. One long column for peace, two short bursts for business, three for warning. The system was simple but effective, spreading information across miles of open sky. Communication, even in silence, was an art form. You sit beside the river now, your feet dangling in the cool water. A trader offers you a piece of dried salmon, its flavor rich and smoky. He smiles and tells you it came from a place where the sun stays low even in summer. His accent carries traces of faraway winds. You realize that this river is more than water. It is memory in motion, carrying generations of voices forward. Researchers have found evidence of ancient markets near major river junctions, places where people gathered seasonally to exchange not only goods but marriages and stories. These gatherings were vibrant, full of color and ceremony. Feathers from tropical birds might be traded for tools made from Arctic bone. A potter's design from the southwest might end up in a village thousands of miles away. Ideas traveled faster than footsteps. An old story from the Pacific coast tells a trader who once followed a river for so long that he forgot where he began. When he returned home, his village no longer recognized him, but the beads he carried told them everything. They said he had crossed the world and brought a piece of it back. The story is part myth, part truth, and all wonder. It reminds you that exploration and return were never separate, they were parts of the same circle. There is something soothing about the sound of paddles striking water. You close your eyes and listen. The rhythm feels ancient, almost like a heartbeat. The traders move with trust in the river, never fighting its current, always adapting to its flow. You think of how different this kind of travel is from modern motion, how peaceful and deliberate. As the day warms, the traders depart again. Their canoes slip back into the current, carrying the scent of cedar and salt. You watch them disappear around a bend, their songs fading into the distance until only the river's voice remains. It might amuse you to imagine that each wave of their passing leaves a faint echo, as if the water itself remembers. In a way, it does. Sediment preserves the ashes of campfires, the scraps of nets, the fragments of pottery. Every ripple carries a piece of the past. The river holds them all. You rise and follow its path until dusk. The forest thins and the horizon glows red with sunset. You can still hear water moving somewhere ahead, a low murmur beneath the wind. For those who lived by the river, that sound was life itself, the promise that no matter how far they traveled, there would always be a way home. The river narrows as you follow it north, its voice quieter now, threading through a valley lined with willow and birch. The air feels crisp, carrying the faint scent of frost and pine. Ahead, a group of travelers moves steadily along a worn path, their shadows stretching across the morning mist. They walk with purpose, carrying bundles wrapped in hide, tools slung over their backs, and a quiet knowledge of where the seasons will take them next. Ethnographers have long noted that many native peoples lived in rhythm with the turning of the year. Their migrations were not wanderings but orchestrated movements, as deliberate as the phases of the moon. Some families traveled from mountain to valley, following herds of deer and elk. Others moved between forests and riverbanks, guided by the bloom of berries or the thawing of snow. Each journey repeated the past, yet created something new. To move was to remember. Curiously enough, many groups marked their seasonal routes with small stone piles or carved symbols on trees. These markers were not meant for strangers but for their own descendants, subtle signposts in a landscape that could change with every flood or fire. They spoke quietly through the ages, saying, "Here we camped," or "Here the salmon ran thick." A few of those markers still stand, unnoticed by hikers and travelers who pass them by. Historical records from early European explorers describe how the timing of these movements was astonishingly precise. In some regions, the appearance of certain birds signaled when to leave the coast for the mountains. In others, the sound of frogs emerging from their winter burrows meant it was time to prepare for planting. The wilderness itself served as clock and compass. No one needed a calendar when the land spoke so clearly. There is no consensus among researchers regarding how formal these seasonal routes became. Some argue that tribes returned to specific camps year after year, maintaining them like second homes. Others believe the migrations were flexible, adjusting to weather, prey, or trade opportunities. What everyone agrees on is that the movement kept balance between people and land. By never taking too much from one place, they allowed nature to heal and renew. You walk beside the travelers now, feeling the rhythm of their steps. The sun climbs higher, glinting on the river's surface. A child carries a small basket of dried berries, their color bright against her brown hands. An elder hums softly, a tune that seems to keep time with the motion of walking. The air is filled with small sounds, footsteps, laughter, the creak of leather straps. It feels peaceful, purposeful, alive. An amusing little detail from oral tradition says that travelers would sometimes scatter a few corn kernels or bits of food along the trail as they moved. It was an offering to unseen spirits, a gesture of thanks for safe passage. The act was simple but beautiful, gratitude shared with wind and soil. You imagine those kernels sprouting quietly after rain, small green echoes of a journey already forgotten. Anthropologists have discovered that these migrations often followed what we might call natural highways, river valleys, ridgelines, and passes carved by animals long before humans arrived. Buffalo trails became human paths, and those paths later turned into trade routes. The entire continent was a web of movement, invisible on any modern map, but alive in the memories of the people who traveled it. You stop beside a birch tree, running your finger over its pale bark. The travelers ahead begin to climb a slope, their figures framed against the rising sunday. You can sense the invisible lines that connect each season to the next. The land holds memory the way a drum holds rhythm, steady and patient. Every migration retraced the same melody, sung differently each year, but always familiar. An old legend from the Great Plains tells of a woman who could hear the seasons change. In her dreams, winter spoke with the voice of a white fox, and summer came as the rustle of corn leaves. She led her people according to those voices, moving camp before danger came. Whether or not such a gift ever existed does not matter. The story reminds you that paying attention can sometimes feel like magic. It might surprise you to learn that some tribes built temporary shelters so cleverly that they could be packed up and carried in a single day. The plains tipi, made from poles and buffalo hides, was one of humanity's earliest examples of portable architecture. In the north, skin tents and snow houses served the same purpose, adapting perfectly to each climate. Home was not a fixed place. It was wherever the fire burned and the people gathered. Cultural historians point out that this constant motion shaped more than lifestyle, it shaped identity. To move with the land meant belonging to it, rather than owning it. Territory was not something to be fenced or divided, but something to be shared, honored, and remembered through stories. A river was not a border but a friend. A mountain was not a wall but a guide. As the sun dips toward afternoon, the travelers reach a meadow thick with wildflowers. They begin to set camp with the ease of practice. Fires are lit, hides stretched, and laughter fills the air. The children chase each other through the grass, and the elders sit watching, quiet satisfaction in their eyes. Every movement has purpose, every action memory. According to some archaeological findings, a few seasonal campsites were used for hundreds of years, layer upon layer of hearths and tools preserved in the soil. Each return added another chapter to the same story, the past mingling with the present. The land became a living archive, its pages written in ash and bone rather than ink. As evening arrives, you sit by one of the small fires. The smell of roasting fish drifts on the air. Someone begins to sing, a song about stars guiding the journey home. You look up and see the first faint lights appear above the treetops. The constellations are shifting again, just as they always have, marking another turn in the great circle of time. You realize that these people did not simply survive through migration, they thrived because of it. By following the pulse of the earth instead of resisting it, they built a harmony that outlasted empires. The lesson is simple and quiet. Move when the world moves, and you will never be lost. The fire crackles softly, and the voices fade into laughter. You close your eyes, letting the sound of the river lull you to stillness. The season is changing again, but for now, everything is exactly where it should be. The morning mist clings low to the grass, curling around your ankles as you walk through a clearing dotted with small shelters. Smoke from cook fires rises in thin lines toward the pale sky. The sounds of laughter and chatter ripple through the air. You can hear the thump of wooden mallets, the clatter of stone tools, and the gentle rhythm of children's voices repeating lessons half in play, half in imitation. This is the world of learning, a living classroom without walls, where each sunrise begins a new lesson in survival. According to accounts passed down through generations, children were not shielded from the tasks of daily life. From the moment they could walk, they learned through watching and listening. No one lectured, no one scolded. Knowledge was absorbed like sunlight, steady and constant. A young boy might follow his uncle into the woods to learn how to track deer by the smallest bend of grass. A girl might watch her grandmother crush herbs into paste, memorizing which roots cured pain and which caused it. Archaeological evidence shows miniature tools buried alongside toys in ancient campsites. Tiny bows, child-sized baskets, and small clay pots suggest that play was practice. Through imitation, the young learned the skills they would need as adults. What to modernize might look like games were actually rehearsals for survival. Each laugh and stumble prepared them for the weight of responsibility that would someday rest in their hands. One charming detail recorded in tribal oral history tells of how some elders used riddles and stories to teach lessons without direct correction. A forgetful child might be told a story about a squirrel who hid too few nuts for winter and woke up hungry. A careless one might hear of a fox who chased its own tail instead of the rabbit. The lesson always arrived wrapped in humor, never in shame. Ethnographic studies indicate that education among native peoples was collective rather than hierarchical. Every adult held a piece of knowledge to pass on. The hunter taught silence and observation. The gatherer taught rhythm and patience. The storyteller taught empathy and memory. No one was too young or too old to teach. The result was a society where learning never ended, and wisdom was measured not by age, but by generosity of spirit. Scholars remain divided on how much structure these teaching systems held. Some describe them as informal, guided entirely by curiosity and experience. Others argue that rituals of learning existed, marked by songs or initiations. What both sides agree upon is that knowledge was lived, not memorized. It was something you practiced until it became instinct. You crouch near a group of children now, watching as they trace animal tracks in the mud. A girl points to a set of small prints and says softly, "Rabbit." Another shakes her head, laughing. "Too deep. That's fox." Their teacher smiles but does not correct them. She lets the debate play out, knowing that truth discovered is more powerful than truth given. It might surprise you to know that storytelling was a central part of this education. When night fell, families gathered around fires to hear tales of heroes, tricksters, and spirits. Each story held a lesson about courage, humility, or respect for nature. The trickster characters, raven, coyote, spider, were not villains but teachers of mistakes. They showed what happened when pride clouded judgment, and their mischief made wisdom memorable. Researchers have found that language itself was a vital tool for teaching. Many native languages are descriptive rather than abstract, built on verbs instead of nouns. To speak them is to describe movement and relationship rather than static things. A mountain stands, a river moves, and a tree breathes. Children learned through this very structure that life was dynamic and interconnected. Words carried the rhythm of the living world. An unexpected habit among some families was to begin each morning with a quiet reflection. Parents would ask their children what dreams they remembered. Dreams were believed to carry guidance from the spirit world. A child who dreamed of flying birds might be told to observe the sky that day, to notice wind or weather changes. In this way, even sleep became part of education. You watch as the older children practice archery at the edge of the clearing. Their laughter echoes with confidence. Each arrow lands closer to the mark. In the distance, younger ones gather flowers and feathers, arranging them into patterns in the dirt. Learning here looks like play, but the discipline behind it runs deep. According to stories told by elders, young people were not punished for failure but guided through it. A hunter who missed his mark might be teased good-naturedly, but the laughter reminded him to stay humble. A gatherer who picked the wrong plant would be gently corrected, then asked to teach the right one to someone else. Mistakes were gifts, not shame. There is a touching detail in some historical records describing how children often mimicked ceremonies in miniature. They built small fires, spoke tiny prayers, and offered crumbs of food to invisible spirits. It was all practice for a lifetime of gratitude. Even games taught balance. One popular play involved tossing small stones into a circle drawn on the ground. The winner was not the one who scored the most, but the one who played with the most fairness. Anthropologists have written that laughter was as important to survival as skill. It kept the community light in hard times, and reminded everyone that joy was a form of strength. In harsh winters, the children's laughter often echoed through the lodges long after the fires burned low, a sound that lifted spirits more effectively than any sermon. As the sun climbs higher, you see families gathering for the midday meal. The children carry wood for the fire, proudly contributing their share. A grandmother calls out for help stirring a pot, and half a dozen hands reach for the spoon at once. The smell of roasting meat and boiling herbs fills the air. You sit nearby, letting the sounds of conversation wash over you. Every voice blends into the next. Questions, jokes, lessons disguised as stories. You realize this is what true education looks like. It is woven into daily life so completely that it cannot be separated from it. Evening comes slowly. The children lie on the grass, staring at the sky, tracing constellations with their fingers. Somewhere in that quiet, you understand that these children are the wilderness's greatest lesson. They do not conquer it or fear it. They learn from it, play with it, and grow into it, carrying the memory of every stone, every leaf, every story told beside the fire. You close your eyes, listening to the laughter fade into crickets and wind. It feels timeless, as if the forest itself is smiling. The air smells of rain and pine as you walk toward a cluster of shelters built from hide and wood. The morning light catches the curve of smoke rising from the hearths, soft and blue. Around you, the village hums with quiet activity. Women stretch hides across wooden frames to dry. Children gather sticks for kindling, and men return from checking traps along the river. Every motion fits into the rhythm of daily life, each task feeding into the next like notes in a steady song. Archaeological findings show that nothing from a hunt went unused. When an animal was taken, every part had a purpose. The meat became food, the bones became tools, the sinew became thread, and the hide became clothing or shelter. Even the hooves, horns, and fat found their use in glue, ornaments, or light. It was an economy of care and ingenuity, a form of recycling older and wiser than any modern system. Curiously enough, in some communities, hunters would leave a portion of their kill at the edge of the camp for scavengers or spirits. It was a gesture of balance, an acknowledgement that life continues in many forms. Nothing was wasted, and nothing was hoarded. The people understood that the wilderness gave only to those who gave back. Cultural historians point out that the creation of clothing was itself a form of art. A single deerskin might take days to prepare. Women softened it with stones, stretched it over frames, and smoked it gently to make it waterproof. The process required patience and strength. When finished, the hide became soft as cloth but durable enough to withstand rain and snow. These garments were stitched with bone needles and sinew thread, often decorated with shells, porcupine quills, or natural dyes made from berries and clay. Debate still lingers among researchers about the origins of certain patterns found on old garments. Some believe the geometric motifs were purely decorative, while others think they served as personal or tribal identifiers, like woven signatures. Either way, each design told a story. A line of triangles might represent mountains. A spiral might mark the journey of a river. To wear such clothing was to carry one's landscape upon the body. You kneel beside a woman working on a large piece of hide. Her hands move steadily, scraping away the last bits of sinew with a sharpened stone. The rhythmic rasping sound is hypnotic. She looks up and smiles, gesturing toward the drying racks where finished garments sway gently in the breeze. The smell of smoke and leather fills the air, comforting and familiar. It might surprise you to learn that many tribes treated the making of clothing as a communal act. Families worked together, sharing hides and helping with difficult tasks. When a garment was finished, it belonged not only to the wearer, but also to everyone who had touched it. This shared creation turned necessity into connection. According to ethnographic records, the same philosophy shaped the building of shelters. Whether longhouses in the woodlands, tipis on the plains, or igloos in the far north, the materials came directly from the surrounding land. Nothing was imported, nothing permanent. Shelters were designed to breathe, to bend, and to be rebuilt as needed. A home was never a fortress. It was an agreement with the elements. An old story from the plains tells of a hunter who boasted that his new tipi was strong enough to resist any storm. That night, lightning struck, and his lodge burned. When the fire died, he rebuilt quietly, smaller and humbler. The elders told the story for generations as a lesson. The earth will always remind those who forget humility. Excavations have revealed traces of pigments on animal hides used as walls inside lodges. These pigments formed paintings of hunts, constellations, and dreams. The images were not decoration but memory, visual stories told to children before sleep. A single wall might record a lifetime of journeys, each stroke added layer by layer as years passed. When the hide wore thin, it was folded carefully and replaced, never discarded. Anthropologists have suggested that the practice of painting shelters linked art to identity. The home itself became a storyteller, its surfaces whispering of family histories and victories. To step inside was to step into memory. The scent of old smoke and pigment must have lingered like the voice of an ancestor. You stand now in the center of the camp, where a large fire burns and people gather to share food. A young man sharpens a bone knife. An elder plaits cords of sinew. Two women hum softly while working on a robe. The sound of their song blends with the crackle of the flames. It feels like a living heartbeat, steady and eternal. It might amuse you to imagine how much skill went into the smallest details of this life. A child's moccasin required precise stitching to keep out water. A winter coat made from caribou hide could mean the difference between life and death in freezing winds. Every item was functional art, beautiful because it worked. According to cultural historians, even the tools for making these things were often embellished with carvings or paint. A sewing awl might bear the pattern of a bear paw for strength, or a knife handle might be wrapped with dyed fiber to symbolize family lineage. The people found beauty in what was useful, and in doing so, blurred the line between survival and expression. As twilight falls, you watch the camp transform. Fires glow brighter, and shadows lengthen across the ground. The shelters glow softly from within, like lanterns. You can hear laughter, smell the richness of stew simmering in clay pots, feel the soft rhythm of a life built on respect for material and spirit alike. You realize that every shelter and every garment was a story, a declaration that even in the wilderness, comfort and artistry could coexist. The people did not fear the elements. They collaborated with them. Rain was not an enemy but a rhythm. Snow not a barrier but a blessing. The night deepens, and you step closer to the fire. Sparks rise into the dark, glowing briefly before fading. Each spark feels like a fragment of memory, drifting upward to join the stars. The people sleep wrapped in warmth and history, their shelters breathing quietly in the wind. Night has fallen soft and deep, and the forest glows faintly under a sky full of stars. You sit close to a fire that pops and sighs, the flames painting circles of light across the faces gathered around it. Smoke curls lazily upward, carrying the scent of pine resin and roasting corn. The day's work is finished. The tools are cleaned, the food stored, and now it is time for what might be the most important ritual of all, the telling of stories. According to oral historians, storytelling was not a pastime but the pulse of cultural memory. The spoken word carried everything: laws, humor, history, and prayer. A story could teach survival, preserve genealogy, or simply fill the dark hours with warmth. Each tale was alive, changing slightly with every retelling. The same story might sound different in another season or another camp, shaped by the teller's voice and the mood of the listeners. One delightful oddity found among certain tribes is that stories were often told backward in winter, beginning with the ending and unraveling toward the start. It was a trick to hold attention and to remind listeners that time itself could move in circles. The children loved it, laughing when familiar heroes stumbled into their fates too soon, and then waited eagerly to see how the tale would rebuild itself toward the beginning. Ethnographic studies show that the storyteller held a position of quiet authority. They were keepers of truth and imagination, respected like teachers or healers. Yet no one claimed ownership over the stories. They belonged to the people, to the seasons, and to the spirits that inspired them. To tell a story was to keep the world turning. Theories differ on where this tradition began. Some scholars say storytelling grew naturally from the need to share hunting strategies and lessons in safety. Others believe it rose from spirituality, as a way to speak with ancestors and unseen forces. Both explanations feel true. What starts as instruction can become art, and what begins as belief can end as beauty. The storyteller beside you begins to speak. Their voice is low and calm, rising and falling like wind through the trees. The firelight flickers across their face, highlighting the movement of lips and eyes. They tell of a time when animals and humans spoke the same language. In those days, the wolf taught people how to hunt, and the crow taught them how to watch the sky. Then, one day, pride divided the tongues of all living things, and humans had to learn to listen again instead of speaking. You feel the story seep into the night, carried by the crackle of wood and the whisper of leaves. The listeners sit motionless, caught in the rhythm. Even the children are still. When the tale ends, no one claps. They simply breathe together, sharing the silence it leaves behind. It might surprise you to learn that in many cultures stories could only be told at certain times of year. Winter, especially, was the season of storytelling. The snow quieted the earth, and the long nights invited reflection. To tell sacred stories in summer, when the land was awake and working, was considered disrespectful. The timing mattered as much as the words. An old legend from the woodlands tells of a boy who tried to steal stories from the elders by eavesdropping in summer. The spirits of the forest caught him and turned him into a cricket. Ever since, his descendants have sung their stories only after dark, when it is cool enough for remembering. The children around the fire giggle when they hear this, glancing at the chirping in the grass nearby. Researchers have noted that music often wove through these tales. A storyteller might hum between sentences, or tap a drum to mimic the heartbeat of a chase or the rumble of thunder. Sometimes two storytellers performed together, weaving their voices like threads. The performance was not just heard but felt. Curiously enough, some storytellers refused to use their own names while speaking. They said that during the telling, they became someone else, an ancestor, an animal, or a spirit. It was a transformation, a merging of the living and the remembered. The voice belonged to the story itself, not the person who carried it. You look around the circle. The firelight flickers on the faces of those listening. Some lean forward, eyes shining, while others close their eyes to imagine more clearly. The wind shifts, and the smell of the fire drifts upward to mingle with the scent of pine. It feels timeless, this gathering. The same scene could have played out 1,000 years ago, or 1,000 years from now, unchanged in spirit. Anthropologists who study oral traditions have discovered that the stories contain detailed ecological knowledge. Hidden within myths about tricksters and giants are clues about migration, weather, and resource cycles. A tale about a mountain spirit's temper might warn of landslide zones. A story about a greedy fisherman might encode rules about overharvesting. Folklore and science here were never separate things. As the night deepens, the storyteller pauses to let the fire crackle and the crickets sing. You notice how every silence feels intentional, how even the pauses speak. The older listeners nod slowly, recalling their own versions of the same tale, while the children soak it in, eyes wide. It is education, religion, and entertainment all at once, delivered in a single rhythm of voice and flame. The storyteller finishes with a quiet phrase, "May the story return when the stars do." The circle breathes together again. Someone adds another log to the fire, and sparks rise into the night, fading into the darkness above. You lean back, staring at the stars through the thin veil of smoke. They look close enough to touch. The fire's warmth lingers on your skin, and the voice of the storyteller echoes in your mind, fading but not gone. You understand now that stories were the heartbeat of this world. They kept history alive, guided behavior, and comforted hearts. Each word was a thread in the great web of memory, holding everything together. The forest hums quietly, and the night feels softer than before. Somewhere in that sound, another story is waiting to begin. The morning breaks quiet but uneasy. The smoke from the fires drifts in thin, uncertain lines. The birds sing, yet there is something new in their rhythm, a hesitation. You feel it in the air too, a shift that you cannot quite name. The world that had seemed eternal begins to tremble at its edges. Across the valley, strangers are arriving. They carry metal tools that shine brighter than the sun, and they speak in words the wind does not understand. Historical records describe this moment as a meeting of worlds. To those who lived here, it must have felt like the sky itself had changed. New sounds filled the air. The creak of wagons, the clang of pots, the unfamiliar crack of gunfire. The first Europeans stepped into lands that had been tended for thousands of years, often calling them untouched wilderness. They could not see the traces of care that existed everywhere: the irrigation canals, the terraced fields, the managed forests. They mistook harmony for absence. An unexpected account written by an early sailor tells how his crew followed the smell of cooking fish to find a coastal village. The people there greeted them with food and open hands. The sailor marveled at the generosity but failed to see the system beneath it: hospitality as protection. A guest fed well was a guest who would not steal. For the villagers, kindness was strategy as much as virtue. Researchers have documented that at first, exchange defined the relationship between newcomers and the original inhabitants. Fish, corn, and furs were traded for knives, cloth, and beads. Curiosity bridged the language gap, but curiosity gave way to caution, and caution gave way to fear. The strangers carried more than metal; they carried disease, ambition, and the belief that land could belong to one rather than all. Scholars continue to debate whether these early encounters could ever have unfolded differently. Some believe conflict was inevitable, born from incompatible views of ownership. Others argue that cooperation might have endured if greed had not hardened into conquest. The records show moments of friendship, shared meals, and mutual wonder, quickly followed by misunderstanding and mistrust. It is a story as old as humanity itself, told now in voices of those who watched their world tilt away from balance. You walk through the imagined camp, where people gather in uneasy groups, whispering. A child clings to her mother's leg. Hunters return from scouting the river and speak of strange sails on the horizon. The elders meet by the fire, faces lit in orange light, weighing choices that no one has ever had to make before. It might surprise you to learn that some tribes tried to absorb the newcomers into their social systems, offering them symbolic kinship. To be adopted into a family was to become responsible, bound by law and gratitude. A few Europeans accepted and lived peacefully for years. Others refused, unable to imagine belonging rather than ruling. An old story from the northeast tells of a man who came from across the sea. He was welcomed and taught how to fish, how to read the stars, how to survive the winters. When his people returned for him, he left gifts behind: beads, metal, and a single wooden cross carved with his own hands. The elders kept it as a reminder that kindness must always be weighed with caution. Archaeological evidence of this period shows a strange blend of cultures. Iron knives were repaired with bone handles. Clay pots held both native grains and imported wheat. Beads from Europe decorated moccasins and ceremonial garments. It was a fusion of necessity and adaptation. The people learned quickly, as they always had. But the pace of change was too fast, the pressure too heavy. Cultural historians have written that some elders describe this time not as invasion, but as imbalance. The harmony between human and land began to fracture. Trees were cut without ceremony, animals hunted without restraint, rivers blocked and rerouted. The land, they said, grew angry. Whether literal or poetic, the idea captures a truth deeper than history. When balance is broken, everything suffers. You imagine the silence after the first conflicts, the smoke from burned villages rising to mix with the mist. The wilderness, once full of song, now feels cautious. Even the wind seems to listen before it moves, yet survival does not stop. The people who remain gather what they can, moving to safer places, keeping their stories close. It might move you to know that despite the loss, some traditions adapted and endured. Hunters still thanked the animals they took. Mothers still sang lullabies beside new fires. The stories still circled back to balance, reminding listeners that even in chaos, gratitude was a form of resistance. Researchers have found traces of this resilience in letters written by explorers. One soldier, astonished by what he saw, noted that even in flight, the people carried seeds. They planted them wherever they went, leaving behind small gardens of hope. You picture those seeds sprouting quietly in abandoned clearings, green signs of life rising through the ash. An elder once said, "You cannot own the land because you belong to it." The newcomers did not hear that wisdom, but the earth did. The land remembers kindness as surely as it remembers harm. The forests regrew, the rivers cleared, and though many lives were lost, the spirit of balance never vanished completely. As twilight falls again, you stand beside a river that has seen both peace and war. The water flows as it always has, carrying the memories of all who drank from it. You kneel, touch the surface, and whisper a thoughtless prayer of thanks. For a moment, the current seems to slow, as if listening. The night grows still, and a single owl calls in the distance. It sounds like mourning, but also like endurance. The stars above shimmer cold and constant, as if to say that history, no matter how heavy, cannot silence the wind. The air feels quieter now, as if the earth has paused to catch its breath after centuries of upheaval. You stand on a trail that cuts through both time and memory, where the forest meets a small town and the old world blends with the new. The scent of pine still lingers, but somewhere nearby you can also smell gasoline, coffee, and the faint sweetness of bread from a bakery. The contrast is strange yet familiar, like hearing two songs at once. Researchers have noted that many descendants of the first peoples continue to live in deep conversation with the land, even as modern life presses in from every side. They fish the same rivers their ancestors once paddled, forage the same berries, and walk the same trails that used to connect hunting camps. The methods have changed, but the spirit behind them remains the same. Take only what you need, give thanks for what you receive, and remember that survival is not a right, but a relationship. Curiously enough, some communities have revived ancient techniques using modern tools. Along the Pacific coast, for instance, people still smoke salmon the way their grandparents did, but now stainless steel racks have replaced wooden poles. In the southwest, farmers are rebuilding traditional irrigation channels, using computers to measure flow while keeping the old stone alignments intact. It is a blend of ancient rhythm and contemporary precision, proof that tradition does not end, it evolves. Archaeologists studying present-day tribes often find continuity rather than loss. The materials have shifted, but the knowledge has not vanished. Where there was once bone and stone, there is now iron and plastic. Where there were songs, there are still songs, sometimes sung in both English and ancestral tongues. A cell phone might record the chant that was once taught only beside a fire. Progress and preservation walk side by side. Anthropologists remain divided on how to describe this phenomenon. Some call it resilience, others rebirth. But perhaps it is neither. Perhaps it is simply endurance, the quiet persistence of a people who never stopped listening to the wind. Their strength lies not in nostalgia, but in adaptation. Just as the ancestors learned to hunt mammoth, then bison, then deer, so too do their descendants learn to navigate a world of screens, engines, and fences. The wilderness is smaller, but the instinct to survive within it is as vast as ever. You wander along a riverbank where reeds sway and cattails bend in the breeze. A young woman stands waist-deep in the water, casting a net. Her phone rests on a rock beside her, its screen glowing faintly. She hums while she works, the tune an old one, steady and low. When she pulls the net in, silver fish glisten in the sunday. She smiles, murmuring a few words before lifting them free. You do not need to understand her language to know she is giving thanks. It might surprise you to know that the concept of wild food has returned as a modern fascination. People across cities and suburbs now study indigenous foraging methods, searching for edible plants in parks and riversides. What was once necessity has become mindfulness, a way to reconnect with something many forgot how to feel. Yet for native communities, it was never a trend. It is simply continuity, the same thread unbroken. An old elder from the Great Plains once said, "We were never poor because we always had knowledge." That sentiment lives on in every small act of self-sufficiency. You can see it in families teaching their children to identify herbs, in festivals celebrating maple syrup or wild rice, in elders who sit by the fire telling stories about wolves, rivers, and stars. These moments keep the balance alive, even in a changing world. According to environmental historians, indigenous knowledge has begun to reshape modern science. Fire management techniques once dismissed as primitive are now studied by ecologists. Rotational hunting and seasonal gathering have become models for sustainable living. The wisdom that grew from survival in the wilderness has re-emerged as guidance for survival on a fragile planet. The past, it seems, was already planning for the future. It might amuse you to picture the ancestors watching all this from the stars, shaking their heads with wry affection as their old methods return under new names. What modern textbooks call ecological management was once just common sense. The ancestors would probably smile at the idea of people needing to rediscover the simple truth that the earth thrives when treated with respect. You walk through a meadow dotted with wildflowers, some planted intentionally to restore pollinators. The air hums with bees. A sign by the path explains that local native tribes advise the project, teaching volunteers which plants belong together. The knowledge flows from past to present effortlessly, like water finding its own way home. Scholars have pointed out that language plays a crucial role in this revival. Words carry worldview. Many communities now teach children their ancestral languages again, ensuring that the names of plants, rivers, and animals remain alive. To name something correctly is to see it fully, to acknowledge its place in the great circle of life. When those words return, the world becomes whole again. An elder in Alaska once said, "When you lose your language, the trees no longer know your voice." That sentence stays with you as you walk beneath the branches. It feels both literal and metaphorical, a reminder that relationship is built on recognition. The trees are listening still, perhaps they always were. The sun begins to dip, turning the river gold. You see people along the banks, both young and old, casting lines, laughing, sharing food. The smell of smoke and fish fills the air again, mingling with the rustle of wind through grass. The same scene could have unfolded 1,000 years ago. Time has shifted, but the essence has not. You close your eyes and hear the rhythm that has guided this land since the beginning. The flow of water, the murmur of voices, the soft crack of a fire starting somewhere nearby. The wilderness is smaller now, yes, but it still breathes through every act of care. You realize that survival has never been about resisting change, but about remembering who you are within it. The first stars appear, faint and familiar. You breathe deeply, feeling the night settle. The wilderness does not end where the city begins. It lives in memory, in practice, in gratitude. It lives wherever someone listens to the wind and answers gently. The sky above you glows in deep shades of blue and silver. The day has ended quietly, and the forest around you hums with the soft, even breath of night. You stand still, surrounded by the same wilderness that has carried every story before this one. The air feels ancient. It smells of rain and soil, of leaves breaking down into new life, of a world that remembers. Above you, stars prick through the darkness, the same stars that watched over the first hunters, the first fires, the first songs of thanks. Historians have written that every culture on this land, no matter how far apart, looked up to these same skies for meaning. The stars were maps, calendars, and teachers. They told when to plant and when to hunt, when to travel and when to rest. Each cluster of light held a lesson. The Lakota saw the shape of a bison in the stars. a reminder that what lives below is mirrored above. The Cherokee told of a dog chasing a stolen piece of the sun, scattering sparks that became constellations. Each story turned the heavens into a reflection of home. It might surprise you to learn that some tribes use starlight as practical guidance. A faint band of light across the sky, the Milky Way, was said to mark the path of migrating souls or traveling hunters. When you look at it now, you can almost see the same shimmer they once followed, the silent compass that has never failed. Cultural historians suggest that nighttime was the true classroom of indigenous life. Around fires like this, lessons were given, decisions made, and gratitude expressed. The night was not feared but embraced. Its quiet was an invitation to listen. The shadows were not empty but full of memory. There are scholars who argue that these night gatherings formed the backbone of community. The flicker of the fire acted as a heartbeat, drawing people closer, reminding them that they shared warmth, food, and breath. Here, politics and philosophy were discussed in the same rhythm as laughter. Children drifted to sleep to the sound of stories, and the elders' voices became lullabies for an entire world. An old teaching from the plains says that when you look at the stars, you are seeing the campfires of ancestors. They burn just far enough away to light your way, but not close enough to blind you. That image lingers as you stare upward. The night seems wider for knowing that it is full of family. It might amuse you to imagine those ancestors watching this world now, still patient, still kind, perhaps shaking their heads at our restlessness. They would understand, though. They knew that even the strongest hunter needs rest, that even the most tireless traveler must stop to listen to silence. Researchers who study oral history have observed that gratitude was the final act of every day. The people thanked the animals for their gifts, the rivers for their patience, the fire for its light. They thanked the stars simply for being steady. Gratitude was not ceremony alone, but medicine for the mind. It reminded everyone that they were small parts of something immeasurably vast, something that did not belong to them, but still loved them in return. You sit down in the grass and breathe deeply. The night is cool but gentle. Insects murmur softly, and somewhere far away a coyote calls. The sound rises and falls, echoing across the valley like a song to the moon. You close your eyes and feel the pulse of the earth beneath you, faint but steady. According to some modern elders, the wilderness never truly vanished. It simply waits for us to remember how to hear it. Every breath of wind, every flicker of leaf, every ripple in water is a whisper from the past. The people who once hunted, gathered, and prayed here are not gone. They are part of the soil, the trees, and the stars. When you walk quietly, you walk with them. The fire before you begins to die down. The last embers glow softly, tiny stars reflected on the ground. You realize that this story, like all the ones before it, does not really end. It folds into the night and joins the chorus of others. And now, as you sit beneath this sky, you understand what it means to survive. It is not a matter of strength or cleverness, but of balance, to live with the land rather than on it, to remember that everything taken must someday be returned. The wilderness still teaches that truth, if you are patient enough to listen. The last of the fire sighs into smoke, and the stars grow brighter. The world feels peaceful again. You lie back on the cool grass, watching the constellations drift slowly above, the same way they did for those who came before you. The night wraps around you like a soft blanket. The stories settle inside you like small, glowing coals. You think of the first hunters crouched in the forest, the women gathering roots, the children laughing by the river, the elders watching the stars. You think of their footsteps, faint but endless, moving forward across time, guiding yours even now. The wilderness is quieter than before, but not silent. Its voice is still there, waiting. You can hear it in the wind, you can feel it in your heartbeat. You are part of it, and it is part of you. The fire is gone now, leaving only warmth in the soil. The air has cooled, and the night has deepened into something soft and still. The forest breathes